Great to have you listening to The Public Square, which gets underway right now here from the American Policy Roundtable. Today we've got Dave Zanotti at the table and Alan C. Duncan, our producer, and Rob Walgate, and they begin a very interesting and informative discussion that I think we'll all profit from. Dave?
This is going to be a casual conversation that is probably not going to go easy. The design is to have an easy conversation. And I have a feeling that this broadcast, which we're going to start with a small panel today with Alan and Rob and myself, that's going to expand to a much wider group of people over the coming weeks. I have a feeling we might be at this for a number of weeks. So we enter into this conversation because everywhere we turn, people are asking us about the whole question of tariffs and what President Trump is trying to do in regards to the American economy. Now, it's not one of these things where people are throwing bricks or swinging bats or blowing up Teslas. It's nothing like that. It's a genuine interest and curiosity, and I would say a profound humility that we're experiencing among people who are basically just saying, I don't know a lot about tariffs. I mean, I have to admit, I just don't know a lot about tariffs. And I don't know exactly how this is all going to come out. So what do you think? Very honest questions. So I want to start by saying that from what we can tell, there's a lot of research that hasn't been done about tariffs. Okay, there's a lot of things that have been written, kind of like a ping pong match, but there hasn't been much that's been of real serious substance. So Rob, what are you hearing? What are people asking you?
Well, they're asking a lot of questions because I don't think people fully understand it. And unfortunately, we live in a consumer materialistic driven economy where, let's face it, no one says, hey, I'd like to pay a little bit more money for something. So people are always looking at what something costs. And unfortunately, when we've made decisions throughout history to find goods or services at a discounted rate or a cheaper price, what does that mean? What does that mean? Where does that mean you're going to get the good from? Where does that mean the service is going to come from? And I think you're seeing people try and comprehend and understand that because as the consumer, we don't always have an understanding of what that means. We just see what comes out of our account when we pay for something.
Well, interestingly enough, we've been talking about different organizations that have been writing about this subject. And of course, those works are all important. So I was looking through the Heritage Organization's files. And that probably is going to get a pretty big chuckle out of you because I think, Rob, you and I talked about this. Heritage Foundation has been around a long time. I'm remembering and aware of when Heritage Foundation actually began and the people who started it. And I can tell you for just about as long as I can remember the history of the Heritage Foundation, they have not been in favor of tariffs.
They've talked about free trade often through the years in everything that they've written.
I think a little research, we came up with about 20 consecutive articles going back about 20 years in which Heritage Foundation has always been against the idea of tariffs, by and large. I've always been in that idea of free trade, free trade, free trade. So now it appears that the Heritage Foundation is supporting the president's economic moves right now and the president's tariffs. So it appears that they've had a change of mind and or of heart. Now, I haven't read every single word, and they're not here to defend themselves, so I'm not trying to make them look bad. What I'm saying is, if they've moved 1 inch on tariffs, it's significant because it's the first time anybody can ever remember them moving on tariffs.
Yeah, and it raises the question, what caused the move? Was it the policy, or was it the person that proposed the policy? And I think those are the questions that need to be asked.
Alan, did you hear how many peas he put together at the same time?
I'm trying. We've got this pop filter on there that Alan put, so he said
that was
he
excellent.
can let him fly.
Yeah, I was just appreciating the alliteration. It was
yeah,
nice.
I wasn't willing to go past, was it the policy or the politics? I couldn't go past there without getting in trouble. So that's a fair question, and that's for them to determine and for their supporters to determine, and that's only our business because they make it so, because they publish on the subject. So I was talking with our good friend and great counsel, Dr. William B. Allen, about all of this the other day, and we were talking about the history of tariffs, and he reminded me that it was before 1913 we did not have a federal income tax, and so tariffs were much more a part of the American economic policy in regards to international trade. It's because it was one of the ways that we funded our government. And once the income tax became a constitutional amendment in 1916, became law. And that law, by the way, is a very open-ended language, which is what's really gotten us into the trouble that we're in. Congress passed a doozy in the language of that amendment, and the people bought in and ratified it. And in so doing, they gave Congress a great amount of leverage and just a lot of space to make stuff up and call it taxation. And call it constitutional. They've been making a mess of things with that for a long time. But Dr. Allen said, you got to remember, it's easier to just throw up a new tax on the people than it is to deal with international trade policy and tariffs. He said, raising money by tariffs, that was hard work. That was the old school way. This way is a lot easier. And I thought, now that's not something I've heard on Fox News.
No, it isn't. And also, again, it's because the complexity of the issue, it leaves us looking. I mean, think about how much research that we did as a staff, a public policy organization, about this show, diving in the articles. I've got 7-8 articles spread out in front of me. I've got my computer open. This is one that can be a complex issue, and it's one where the short term and the long term can be totally different on what you get out of it. And will there be short-term pain for long-term gain, or will it pay off in the end? That's the thing. That's the other part of our society today. Instant gratification, right? We want everything fixed yesterday. That's how we want it done, and that's how we want this done.
Well, and let's talk then about the next big subject that's kind of surrounding everything, and that's the idea of, okay, well, the way Wall Street's responded is terrifying to people, and they're of the opinion that the tariff idea must be bad because Wall Street's going up and down and up and down and down and down and down, and they check their portfolios, they check their retirement funds, they check their 401ks, and they say, wait a second. Now, there are also companies here that do business, particularly with Canada and Mexico. A lot of companies in the United States are continental in their outreach, let alone those that are global. And some of those folks who voted and supported Donald Trump are now thinking he's the worst president ever because they're all shook up about what the future is for their business book and their orders. So this has created a significant shaking. And you ask yourself, well, why would an administration shake the tree? I can understand the tree being shaken on immigration. We've been talking about this for 20 years, and it's aggravated everybody. There's huge support. But on tariffs, there's not that kind of research and that kind of experience. And so people are sort of like, I don't know here. Now, when you look at the market, people are starting to wonder, is this a mistake? And how will we know? And when will we know? And how soon will we know? And we could line up a dozen different economists right now, all across the spectrum. You could say, no, let's just limit it to conservative economists. And they'd be all over the board on what's going to happen next. But there's one thought that seems to come out of this that seems to prevail. And that's that the president and most of the economics that we've been looking at are looking at the question of the United States and China. And that's how this is cast in probably what the real object is how does the United States work with and deal with China? Now, what we're going to try to do over the next several broadcasts, however long it takes, as this subject's wide open, is we're going to try to ask ourselves some basic core questions on, does a biblical worldview, Does what the Bible teaches, Old Testament and New, from Genesis to Revelation, is there a way to look at these questions from a biblical point of view and reach both justice and righteousness? Now, those words are very, very similar in the Hebrew and Greek. They mean almost the same thing according to most commentators and interpreters. The idea of how do you do the right thing the right way so that people are dealt with fairly, that each gets his own. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be equality, but what it means is that people get what's coming to them as best as we're able to do that in a form of justice and righteousness. So there's a bigger question here. And our first contention, of course, is because God made everything, then the reality is that he has an opinion on everything. And he's told us a lot of what he thinks in those 66 books we recognize as the scriptures. So we're going to be taking a look at those kinds of questions and then trying to bring it forward. And I think the first one that we want to talk about in regards to all of this is the concept of the ethic and the value of work. Now you say, well, duh, kind of obvious. Well, not everybody who's trading is working. All right? Let's think about that for a while. When we come back, we'll get into that subject and talk about the relationship between labor, tariffs, taxes, and economics.
All right, Dave has set it up well, and as always, we're going to learn together here as we talk it out on The Public Square. You'll find us online at thepublicsquare.com and with our smartphone app called The Public Square. It's free of charge. Check it out.
Let's see, there's our tithe, food and clothing budget, taxes, all the insurance, and the car payments. Where's the line in your budget that helps pay the bill for fixing what's wrong in America? Log on today at aproundtable.org and join the growing team that's giving every month to get America back on track. Make your monthly contribution to aproundtable.org. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
I think it's safe to say as we continue on the Public Square now that there's not too many places you'll get this kind of conversation that you're going to hear now on the Public Square. So let's get back to it. Dave?
So, Alan, I'm going to go back to your Bible training and Sunday school classes. I know you spent a few days in church as a kid growing up.
But did I pay attention? That's the question.
Yeah. Book of Genesis. So God put two people, he created two people and put them in a garden. How come? Why the garden, and what was the idea behind it?
Well, I think he put them there, I think for many reasons. I think he wanted to display his glory to them. It was a beautiful place. But it was also a place that they're supposed to do things. They weren't just supposed to sit around and float on clouds and play harps. They were supposed to work. The first job that he gave Adam was to name the animals. And I wish we have a record of those names. That would be pretty cool to hear what those first names.
Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah.
What those first names were. So he's supposed to name things, and then the next thing, once Eve came along, they're supposed to get busy. He had two jobs: name stuff and make more people.
Okay. And third job comes along, and it's basically, you see this garden here? I want you to tend to it. So we human beings have been given certain points of responsibility from the beginning. Now, this is before there was any formal religion, okay? Right? This supersedes all denominations and this was the direct revelation, the experience that we have of the origins of why humans were put here. And of course, there's all kinds of catechisms that have simple and easy to memorize answers to that. But God made us here, and He put us here, and He put us here for purposes. And one of them was to work. Now, I might add that work comes before the fall, right?
It does. Yes. I mean, work gets harder after the fall, but yeah, it certainly precedes it.
Now, see, some people got that wrong. They think that work is a result of the fall. That's a big big doctrinal difference and a big worldview difference. Work isn't the result of the fall. Work was designed for us to be productive before the fall.
Some people view perfection as no work. And I would view that as then the Lord not, if that was the case, then the Lord wouldn't give us the ability to do things. In essence, we'd be robots. We could sit around and do nothing and have everything delivered and done for us. And we know He didn't create us to be that way.
Yeah, that seems like that'd be boring.
Oh, so boring. So boring.
Well, and it also seems that there's a testimony all around us, even after the fall, of how this world works in seasons, from seed to plant to fruit to seed to plant to fruit, from morning to evening, from sunshine to harvest. Seasons, there's a flow in nature that bespeaks of the whole idea of productivity and the responsibility, and that if things are not tended, they don't go well.
Well, and this mirrors God's creation as well. You know, the Lord creates and then He rests. And so so our work mirrors His work in a way. And another reason that He put us in the garden was for a relationship with Him. So He's displaying things about Himself so that we can get to know Him more.
So work's a big part of this. Communication is a big part of this. And so let's talk now about how all of this flows into our concept of economy, because that's one of the things that shake people up. I mean, the longer I live, the more amazed I am at how poorly economic experts communicate the fundamentals. Because if you really want to ask yourself, what is the American economy? I'll tell you what it is. It's the way people get up in the morning, put their feet to the ground, and decide what they're going to do with their time, their talent, and their treasure. The American economy is based upon the choices of 336 million people deciding how they're going to live today and what they're going to do with the time they've been given, the abilities that they've been given, and whatever accumulation of wealth that they have to invest. That's what the economy is.
That is the economy, and there's plenty of talking heads on television that will try and tell us what it is or what it isn't, or why it's going to explode, or why there's going to be a recession. They tell us all these things. I wish sometimes we'd treat those talking heads the way that we do sports stars and go, well, so-and-so, Jim over there, he only shot 120 from the floor. His predictions were only good at about 12% last year. We never look in reverse and
their
say
stats.
Yeah, and say, hey, let's take a look at your stats. How was your prediction going as far as how you said the economy would go based upon this policy decision or that policy decision? Everyone continually speaks on it like they have this authority and they're always going to be correct. I don't hear many of them saying, I got that one wrong. I was wrong on that one. And the fear that they propagate, depending on which side of the aisle they sit, causes a lot of concern for a lot of people that's unnecessary as it pertains to the economy.
Well, and in so many ways, we've got the binoculars upside down. We're looking through the wrong side. The economy, the American economy, isn't something that you chase based upon what experts predict and what elitists determine. The American economy is those people getting up every day and putting their feet on the ground and making choices. So the idea is, well, the economy was good this year, or the economy, as if the economy does not have, it's not like there's some giant monster in a closet out there called the economy. All right, that's not what it's all about. It doesn't work that way. The economy are the choices that people are making and the composite of those choices. Similarly, all right, it's important to understand that you can't make a decision about the economy based solely upon one or two parts of that economy. Like, at what point does Wall Street lead and at what point does Wall Street follow? Think about it. Wall Street doesn't lead. Wall Street basically exists to process the papers of people who've decided to take some of their revenue and invest in publicly traded corporations. The people on Wall Street basically make a living taking care of the paperwork.
It's the ultimate reactionary model. It's just straight reaction. Well, and in talking about that, I happened to be at a place last week where there was someone who worked for a financial institution and they were on the phone right next to me, and I could hear them talking to someone in the office, like telling them to talk the person they were talking to off the ledge as it pertained to selling everything. They're like, this is going to bounce. You need to let them know when it bounces, they're going to miss that bounce. No one can time the bottom. They need to look at this over a 3-year period, not a 3-week period. They're going to panic sell, and the other people are going to make money. So it was interesting to, we were in a tight space where I wasn't eavesdropping. I couldn't help but hear what the guy was saying. We were crammed in somewhere. So I was like, wow, that's interesting. Those conversations were taking place all over the country.
Well, and let's look at it this way too, Rob. I mean, we've done a lot of work at the American Policy Roundtable exposing the fallacies, the false promises, kind of the stupidity of the legalized gambling world and the gambling industry. Now, they make a lot of money. I'm not saying that they're stupid. I'm saying that their model is really, really stupid. And they have to glitz it up the way they do because they don't want you to see how dumb it is, because kind of like they always win. It's always heads I win, tails you lose. It's just a question of how long it's going to take. So I mean, there's nothing new under the sun here. This has been around a long time. But when it comes to the stock market, I'm not going to lie. There are times that, how do you describe the stock market as anything other than the biggest casino in the world?
Oh, it's 100% legalized gambling. It's. I mean, by definition, when you look at risk reward, some people would say it's more of an educated guess. But the folks, rewind the tape 25 years ago, what would the folks of Enron say, or the folks that today are getting caught up in meme coins and different things that are nothing but, There's many that are scams. I won't say all of them are scams, but the same with the stock market. I mean, Elon Musk, let's use him as a perfect example. He told people for years that he thought the price of Tesla was too high as a stock. He said, stop buying it, driving the price up. That's too high. I wouldn't pay that for that, for one share of that stock. So yeah, there's a lot of speculation, no doubt, that goes into there.
So the stock market doesn't lead, the stock market follows. That's a very significant point right there. So if we get up every day determining whether we are in a good economy or a bad economy, again, like it has its own unique personality, we got to remember the bedrock. The economy is the decisions that people make when they get out of bed every day, put their feet on the ground, and decide what they're going to do with their time, their talent, and their treasure. That's what makes up an economy. The stock market is a piece of it, and a wildly speculative piece of it. Now, we're not suggesting that there's anything immoral in the sense that if people want to invest in publicly traded companies, they have every right to do with their money what they choose. But the people that are basically playing the market for fast gain are going to be subject to the same troubles of everyone who plays any market for fast gain. The scripture talks about that. Wealth that's gained quickly versus wealth that is gained and earned a little bit at a time. Pace of play matters in regards to wealth creation. And the stock market is designed to be a glorified casino with fancy suits, fancy cars, and a lot of cable television blabbing all over the place, making people feel safe or making them feel scared.
Yeah. And when you look at the stock market, there's people that put their money in there and they kind of step away and let someone manage it and don't look at it as the day-to-day gamble. They know it's a 30-year play or a 40-year play. But the people that are looking at it, you're opening your account every hour, taking a look, and you always want to wheel and deal. Yeah, you're going to ride some highs and lows. The folks that put it away and don't touch it in the companies that they trust, are much different.
Yeah, I checked mine, and I don't have a lot, but I've got a Roth IRA that my dad helped me set up years and years ago. Should have been putting a lot more in it than I have, but I checked it right after Trump was elected, and it was high. I was like, oh, nice, the highest I've ever seen it. And then I checked it, last week, and it took a haircut. It was a trim, like a 20%. If it shows how little I have in there. But
and legally, you can't take that money without penalty for another 20 years. So
exactly,
you looked at it and you got your emotions. If you'd had your Oura ring on, you would have saw your heart rate would have spiked for no reason.
Precisely. I've heard people say recently, what you have in there only really matters when you buy it and when you sell it.
Well, we're going to talk about some of these companies when we come back, and you don't want to miss this. There's some really interesting stones about to be turned over here.
Yeah, and you never know what you're going to find when you turn those rocks over. Okay, well, the guys will be back in just a moment here on the Public Square. Thanks for your support of this program, which would not exist without our listeners. Thank you for that. And I hope you're sharing this broadcast with others. You can do that easily by using the smartphone app, the Public Square, or you can just simply copy the link online at thepublicsquare.com and put that in an email to your friends. Thanks for doing that, and the guys will be back in a moment here on the Public Square. With all the talk recently about tariffs and the economy and the stock market and work, we thought it'd be a good idea to sit down and talk about it on the Public Square. So Dave Zanotti, Rob Walgate, and Alan C. Duncan are doing that today. They've laid a biblical groundwork for it, but let's get back to the conversation, guys.
This next few minutes is going to be a lot of fun because we're saving people a whole lot of time on the research because what we're looking at is a chart that talks about the largest American companies by market capitalization. So what we're talking about here are the companies that dominate people's attention based on stocks because they're so big and people invest in them because they're the big ones. They're the blue chips. They're the big guys that people who invested in them 30 years ago, are now on a beach somewhere, sending postcards to their friends. Okay, I mean, this is the stuff of the front door, the top tier of what happens in the world of Wall Street. So, number one company, based on their market capitalization, that means how much is the company worth? Apple, number one. Rob, were you surprised to see what Apple's worth?
Well, $3 trillion.
$3 trillion bucks.
And based on stock price based on the roller coaster that it could be on, it's always changing, right? It's always changing.
Yeah, now the $3 trillion is worth is not what it would sell for if it was available to be sold. It'd be sold for much, much more than that. It's basically if you bought everybody out at the current stock price right now and you took over the company dollar for dollar, you'd have to pay out $3 trillion. That's right. That's just if you were going to displace the shareholders at par, if you will. Okay, $3 trillion bucks, Apple. That's kind of a big deal.
It's a big number.
Number one. All right, number two is Microsoft. Number three is NVIDIA. Number four is Alphabet, Google. And number five is Amazon. And number six is Meta. That kind of tells you the story of America for the last 30 years.
All tech. It's all tech.
Yeah.
It's all tech.
Yep.
It's all tech. Now, to credit, Apple makes a lot of stuff. They make a lot of stuff. Microsoft makes stuff. NVIDIA makes the chips that are now fueling the whole AI conversation. Alphabet and Google, they make stuff. They don't make quite as much stuff as the other guys up there. Amazon doesn't make stuff. Amazon moves stuff. All right, so their product, believe it or not, is service. All right, they don't make stuff, they move stuff. Now, they do have a division in tech that's pretty important and glitzy too. So again, not criticizing these companies. And Meta, that's the one that's the biggest heart. I never have been able to figure out what Meta does, going the whole way back to Harvard when it got started with Zuckerberg. Okay.
Well, Amazon does have that technological component because, we all think about what we shop and buy from Amazon, but some of the big suppliers that deliver stuff were then advertising in the past 12 months about having a picture with delivery to guaranteed. And I was thinking, well, Amazon's done that for years and years. Like they kind of led the technology charge when it comes to that. So they're moving, but they're involved in that as well for sure.
All right, so the number 7 is Berkshire Hathaway. That's Warren Buffett. That's the investors network. Now you've got, in essence, Wall Street playing in the game, Berkshire Hathaway. Number 8 is Broadcom. Now, you'd pretty much be expecting pretty soon we're going to get to Ford, General Motors, and all that sort of stuff. No. In fact, there's no auto companies in the top 100 except this one, number 9, Tesla.
Yeah.
A company that didn't exist 50 years ago.
Right. Tesla, and it is an auto company, but it's doing so much in so many other areas. You know, think of Elon Musk buying Twitter and what he's using that to do for AI and so many other things. So I think Tesla at the end of the day is going to make a lot of money outside of the auto realm as well. So they're dipping into that technology stuff as well as the others.
Well, and Elon, isn't it true that Elon was a bit critical of these tariffs that Trump's been leveling as well? So that's been kind of interesting to see those two at odds.
And we're going to, and I want to get in a couple of minutes. I'm going to get into the criticism because I think that there's a lot of sides to the tariff conversation that they wouldn't need to be throwing rocks over. We need to be actually analyzing because there are some benefits and there are some things that are neutral and there's some things that are, whoa, wait a second now. I'm not sure that's going to work. All right. And the truth of the matter is, I don't think anybody's sure right now, but we're going to get there. Number 10 rings in at Walmart. You would have thought Walmart would be number 1, right? Because of all their employees and everything else. But on gross market capitalization, nope, Walmart, according to these statistics, isn't even worth $1 trillion. Most of the other companies we talk to, for top 7 are all worth $1 trillion. And then there's a couple that are worth $2 to $3 trillion. All right, it's like, it's $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. We get into more JP Morgan, Visa, First Healthcare, one shows up at $533 billion, number 14, United Health. It's interesting. JP Morgan Chase, Visa, MasterCard, they're all coming in on this one now, okay? Because now it's the money players.
Well, Eli Lilly, that's sort of healthcare as well, right? We kind of jumped them. I don't know if we're coming back, but they're a pharmaceutical company, right?
Right. Big Pharma's right up there. And Big Pharma and healthcare is up in this business pretty well, and they keep showing up too. Interestingly enough, number 17, this is pretty hilarious. I bet nobody would put Costco in this list.
Well, when you look at what their market cap has done over the last 5 or 10 years as far as growth, it's been, they're on an accelerated pace. They have really solidified themselves.
So Costco's up there, but here's the one I think that probably blew me away the most. Yeah. Number 18, with a market cap at $417 billion, is Netflix. I can hear people screaming "what" at their radios and their phones all over the world on that one. You got to be kidding me.
But they probably have a Netflix subscription. So,
Netflix, they started pushing videos, running videos through the mail. How do you get to $417 billion in market value? All right. Procter & Gamble's in there. Of course, we got to get the soap companies in there. Johnson & Johnson's up there. Home Depot and Lowe's both made the top 100 list, which is pretty interesting. But this is a different game altogether. Then we get into the phone companies, right? And of course, AT&T is going to be number 1 at coming in at number 25, right?
I thought AT&T would be number 1 by a bigger margin, though. I don't know why. I just thought.
Because they're not number 1. It's on 25
for T-Mobile.
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 I'm looking at them over Verizon, AT&T. Right? T-Mobile's number 1 over them. Wow.
And Verizon's number 1 is number 2, I think.
No, AT&T is just in front of Verizon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. So there's the 3 big phone companies are in the top 40 of the biggest, wealthiest companies in the world, in the United States. We've got more drug companies in there. Let's hear it for General Electric. They come in at $36, $198 billion market value. They make stuff. Okay, they make stuff. And this isn't just about manufacturers. A lot of this is service. There's a lot of it's financial. It really is spread out quite a bit. There's a lot of spread in all of this.
Well, go to number 53 if you would. Go to number 53.
53. What do you got? 53. Oh, you got to be kidding me. Coming in at a market value of $154.79 billion. Uber?
Uber. And it's only going to get bigger, in my opinion, because you're going to have driverless cars. And Uber is going to take off under that model because they're going to part of their expense is going to go away and paying out the person that has to sit behind the wheel.
Well, they're probably going to be Teslas, and so Teslas will continue to go up as well.
Uber is bigger than Disney.
Yeah.
Wow.
Disney ranks 54th and Uber is 53. I mean, this sort of stuff is very, very surprising. I was thrilled to see Caterpillar still up in this list. That's a good old American company that makes a lot of stuff. Union Pacific, let's hear it for the railroads. They made it up there as well. Then there's our good friend Comcast. Now, Disney is still the biggest communications company on market cap. Comcast is bigger than Disney in annual revenues. These folks produce a gargantuan amount of revenue for their shareholders and they make boatloads of money. So we keep going down, and we could do this for a long time. Other surprises that we saw, Starbucks made it to 93. Waste Management, let's hear it for the garbage guys. All right. They're not stupid. Waste Management's 96 at $931 billion picking up people's garbage and being in service. There's a lot of other things in here that are fascinating. Why look at all of this? Because if people want to invest in companies like it's a board game and they have money to invest and they're curious as to what it would actually, they have every right in the world to invest. But that is not what controls our economy. What controls our economy are all the choices that people make in relationship to these companies. Because none of these companies would be there if they didn't have something to offer that people got up in the morning, got out of bed, and made a decision to invest their time, their talent, or their treasure in something that these companies have to offer.
All right, well, let's pause right there and take another break here on the Public Square. Again, thanks for your prayers and support of this program, which wouldn't exist without listeners being behind it. So you see how very important that is to us. We're going to use Apple as an example when we come back with Dave Zanotti, Rob Walgate, and Alan C. Duncan. Stay with us.
We will be right back for more on the Public Square.
Just before we return to the conversation today in the Public Square, have you thanked the radio station that you listen to for carrying this program? The Public Square is pretty unique, so say thank you for what you are hearing. Now let's return to the conversation with Dave and the team.
So let's go back up the list, and let's go back up to Apple and use Apple as an example. Now, full disclosure, I'm communicating to you today through Apple communication products that they've built, computers, and there's other products as well involved. There's some really cool technology from some other companies like Rode and others. But our framework of communications at the American Policy Roundtable has a lot of Apple products connected and involved. And I have a tremendous respect for Steve Jobs' founding vision, which is that computing needs to be in the hands of everybody. And I think that decision and his commitment, along with his partners, has changed the world. So I think that's a big deal. But we're going to use Apple as an example, and probably everything we're going to talk about here isn't necessarily going to be pretty. And we don't mean any offense to anyone. We're not suggesting any investment advice either. But let's take a look at Apple and tariffs. Well, Apple's an American company. In fact, it's the wealthiest American company based on market cap. And there was one point in time, I think 2 years ago, that Apple had more money in their bank account than the United States Treasury. True story. And you know what their biggest product is cell phones. And let's talk about where those cell phones get made.
It's been referred to as iPhone City in China. That's what they call it, iPhone City. And I believe the articles that we're diving into, they employ roughly 300,000 people in iPhone City. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, you right.
When I read it, I was like, 300,000. I was trying to think of some of the cities of comparable size that you've been to. I'm like, 300,000 employees to make these phones. And then, when you think about it, the United States has 5 to 7% of the world's population. So they're not all being sent here. They're being sent everywhere.
Yeah. That's pick a sports stadium and then divide how many times you could fill it. That's filling a sports stadium multiple times with that many people.
It's incredible. And so they've got all these employees overseas. They make these products overseas. They bring them back to the United States of America and they sell them. And some of the articles I've been looking at, and this is speculation, so please don't, Apple lawyers, please save your phone time. We're not making it as this is an absolute statement of fact. There are reports in the media that indicate the cost of making an Apple phone is under $600. Okay? And they sell for a good bit more than that. So there's a pretty healthy profitability in that phone as well. All right. Almost all the employees that do the actual production of this most important item, as well as a lot of the rest of their technology, are doing it all overseas. So it comes back here, and now it might be subject to tariffs. Now, for a while, it looked like Apple was going to get hit. Basically, it's sort of because most of it's coming from China or India, that they were going to get hit pretty hard with tariffs. And now there's discussion of exemptions or changes in regards to these kinds of technologies because of their vital nature in the flow of America's economy. Okay.
Well, so it begs the question, hey, why don't we just build some factories here and build them here?
Thank you, Alan. That's the question, right? Where you see how we're tracking with this thing. Okay, so we're all using the phones. We're paying big bucks for them. Let's bring them to the United States. Let's make them here. And that should be a win-win for everybody. Maybe not a win-win for the 300,000 people that would lose their jobs in China. So that's one thing. But let's talk about another side of this equation, and that's that let's say we're going to bring suddenly all the Apple production to the United States of America. What are we going to need? 300, 400, 500,000 more employees, right? Well, that's fantastic. Think of the tax benefits and the employment. This is good. Jobs good. Jobs good. If tariffs means jobs for America, that's good, good, good. You know what? I'd like to put on that T-shirt. I'd like to take out those pom-poms and get the megaphone and cheer, cheer, cheer. I'm all for that. There's just one problem. Right now in the United States of America, we've got 9 million available jobs posted that people can see and track. We've got 6 million people who are unemployed. So if we bring back the 300,000 jobs from Apple, if we bring back 100,000 jobs from Apple, and we start to go across all these top 100 companies that do all of this labor outsourcing around the world and say they're all coming home because they're going to beat the tariffs, how are they going to find a workforce?
How are they going to find a workforce? And we also do have to be realistic in if they are working in iPhone City now, what is the time frame? Or what does that look like for the infrastructure to be built to be able to handle employing 300,000 people?
Even if we could do that and build out the infrastructure, this Wall Street Journal piece that we passed around with the title of An American-Made iPhone, Just Expensive or Completely Impossible, makes the case that there's a skills gap. We don't even have people that are trained to know how to put these things together. We have a gap in there's very skilled labor that it takes to do it. And then there's the low wage labor. That's a lot of just brute force. Also, those folks make about $3 an hour in China. So who are you going to get to do this for $3 an hour here? So this goes a million places.
Okay, so that goes back to saying, well, wait a second. Now, Apple's going to have to be a big player here because Apple's going to have to decide that they're willing to balance that up. They're going to beat the tariffs. They're going to bring jobs home. There's some value in that. And, okay, it's going to cost them more, so they're going to have to change their profitability. They'll still make money, but they won't make as much. Now, that would be one thing if Apple was a company that was owned by a family in a private industry and they had already made gazillions of dollars and their shareholders could sit together around one table or in one room, and they could decide, we could all do with less for the better good of everybody. But Apple isn't that company. Apple has shareholders who expect to make more every year in dividends and expect their value to go up. So how can Apple say, as a publicly traded corporation, as this massive conglomerate, the biggest company in market cap, how are they going to say, well, you'll have to just get along with less for the next 20 years because we got to make this big transition? How's that going over at the next shareholders meeting? Find me a CEO that's willing to die on that hill.
This isn't an easy problem to solve.
That's kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, and I'll tell you this, when we study history, we've seen things like this before. I mean, look at all the jobs that we've exported to other countries for these reasons. I mean, I was back home where I grew up over the weekend, and I was driving from Pittsburgh to East Liverpool, and you drive right through Midland, Pennsylvania. You drive right past, there I am explaining to my 16-year-old, that is an old steel mill. And when kids graduated high school back in the day, they didn't worry about college. They knew they were going straight to the steel mill to get a job in the 60s and in the early 70s and the 50s. And, my dad started talking about all the empty restaurants that were down there, all the empty, bars and storefronts and churches and just everything that was there. And we shipped all that overseas for a cheaper price.
There's a quote in one of these Wall Street Journal pieces that says exactly that, Rob. This is a guy named Doug Guthrie. He is a professor at Arizona State University. He used to work on organizational development for Apple in China. And he says it took China 40 years to build a complex manufacturing supply chain. We used to have that. It's a disaster that we let it go.
And to get it back is going to take multiple levels of people making changes in colleges and universities and technical schools and high schools. And so the idea of, yes, God put us here to work, good idea. But if you've got more jobs and you've got people willing to work, how can a company survive here? So now this is not to say, you see, if we try to divide this entire thing between Wall Street and the rest of us, that won't work. If you try to divide between tariffs and no tariffs, that won't work. There are multiple, this is worse than playing that board game Catan, okay, where have you ever played that one with all the different cards and you get the wheat and the wood and all that stuff and all the different things going on all at the same time? It's complicated. I've won it one time in my life. It's a hard game. So's this.
Catan, I can't handle Monopoly. Hey, this conversation will continue. We're aware that some of you have to leave us now. The rest of the program can be heard online at thepublicsquare.com and with our smartphone app.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square.
The whole issue of work and economics can be a tough one sometimes, but we're getting lots of help today from the conversation. So let's return to our final segment now. Here's Rob Walgate.
One more thing about this Wall Street Journal article. Here's a quote from the article. More than 1 million workers churn out cutting-edge devices on a tight schedule. Their work is one of the strongest economic ties between the world's two superpowers, one in which Apple is essentially one of the largest indirect employers, the other where it delivers the device most essential to daily life.
Okay, that author, writing a bit awkwardly, is saying this is about America and China. This is about America and China. And you know what? That's where we started. In many, many parts of this conversation, this is about America and China and what's going on in the world right now among the superpowers.
Well, I mean, and in a sense, that's a good thing that we're linked via this deeply via trade, because we're not going to want to blow each other up. So I mean, that's a positive, I think, diplomatically speaking.
I think you're right, but what if they want? What if there's an interest between the two superpowers in blowing each other up economically?
Well, economically, and we're talking about devices that we're using, but we also could dive in and look at pharmaceuticals, and we could look at food. We look at so many other things we depend on. I was listening to someone not long ago, and they were talking about, they were like, you know who loves Christmas? Do you know who loves Christmas? And I was waiting for and they were like, China loves Christmas because of all the money the United States spends on Christmas. They don't love Christmas for the reason of Christmas, but they love it because we're addicted to spending money during Christmas.
So the second part of this quote really leaps off the page because the author decides that the cell phone is the most essential device to the human race. Is that kind of what they said? How'd that quote end?
Yeah, to daily life, basically saying can't can't survive without it. Although it's that quote, which, hey, I'm way too addicted to mine. But do you know anyone that has put their phone down more or put it away or tried to step away from it and said, yeah, I was worse off for doing that. I should have never spent less time on my phone.
So Alan's wearing his Masters sweatshirt in studio today. And
thank you, Rob.
Rob, because of his connections with wonderful people involved in professional golf, has opportunities to visit a lot of nice places, and sometimes we get to go along with him. Over the years, I've had the privilege to be at Augusta, and Rob has been at Augusta. Alan, you've been there too, right?
No, I have not. Haven't made the trip
Not yet. We're getting them there. Not yet. That's on the list.
Nice. It's on radio. It's going to happen now. Good.
Okay, so you have to buy your own stuff. Okay, but the idea is about Augusta that is quite interesting and almost never talked about. Is no matter how many 100,000 people come through those gates over that 7-day period, none of them brings a cell phone in the property with them. Zero.
The Masters was recently played. I encourage you to look up pictures from the Masters online and look at the people that are present there in the moment. Then go find another sporting event, whatever one you want, and look at pictures from there. The Final Four, the Super Bowl, and look how many people have phones in their hand. Look at the difference.
I never thought about that, Rob.
That's a great exercise. I want to do that. And just to further clarify this point on a totally different level, I recently had jury duty. And one of the things you're not allowed to do during jury duty is look at your phone. And so we had 12 folks, and then 2 alternates sitting in a jury box, no phones, no paper or pens or pencils. The judge didn't want us to take any notes. And you just have to sit there and listen and watch body language and be completely present in that moment. And it was remarkable what you could actually remember, particularly when you sat around with the people who experienced the same thing you did. You didn't need notes, and you didn't need phones, and you didn't need to take a picture. And it opened my eyes. I'm like, we really could do this if we wanted to do it. We could.
Now, Alan, did they ask you to give up your phone, or just they wouldn't let you see it in your hands? Did they actually surrender it?
No, we didn't have to surrender it, but you would have been reprimanded in some way, or you told, chastised to put it away. So yeah, you couldn't. Right. You just couldn't look at it.
I know that at the Supreme Court, it's the same thing. You will never see a cell phone brought through those doors. So that does create full presence of there. And you know, Rob, I've never thought what you said. It is perfect. When you look at the roar of the crowd when Justin Rose made his putt on 18, to tie for the championship and force a playoff. And when Rory McIlroy then made the putt on 18 and won the tournament in the playoff, you see everyone standing, their hands in the air, and you don't see a single cell phone. There's not one.
Not one.
Not one single cell phone. Everyone is completely present in the moment.
Maybe one Christmas in America, we should try it. I know we're all about taking pictures at Christmas in America, but maybe one year we should try it.
Ooh,
you know what? I leave mine in the car now during church. I know everything's on the Bible app, and they encourage you to follow along on your phone.
Me too, Rob. I give it up. I'm putting it in the car. I'm not bringing it in.
I can't do it. I'm willing to admit I cannot do it. I leave it in the car because if I don't, and we all think, well, we may miss something. What are we going to miss? Mm-hmm. What are we going to miss?
So there's one other point we want to launch here. And again, each of the topics that we brought to the table today, the biblical mandate for work, how God values work, the value of work, the value of relationships, the value of jobs, all of these things. We've touched on probably a dozen major articles that we have touched on that we're going to have to return to. There's one other point. We asked, we took at the unemployment situation. You've got 9 million posted jobs and 6 million people. That's a whole nother program we're going to have to do on the reality of why the American workforce is shrinking so dramatically. It also is a subset of very complicated issues, real issues, not beyond anyone's comprehension, but they stack up pretty quickly. But one of the things that is clear across the China and United States conflict is that both these countries are battling each other over control of natural resources and manufactured products and the economics that are entailed therein. But the other thing these two countries have in common is a collapsing birth rate. And none of the articles write about that. You see, you can say we're going to have 300,000 people in iPhone City, but China's collapsing as a population. Their projection by 2070 in regards to their population is terrifying. They won't have jobs there. Apple won't be able to pull that off in less than half a generation away. But the United States is no better off. Our birth rate is declining so dramatically that if we brought 2 million jobs back over because of tariffs, we'd only have 11 million posted jobs and 6 million people.
Now we're back to the garden again.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was your job?
Yeah.
Yeah, what was your job and what are you supposed to do? So there's a certain reality to all of this that has very profound spiritual import and a profound import in regards to the survival of the species. We've said it here before, we say it often, and I'm not afraid to say it again. It doesn't matter what your religion or lack thereof. If you have faith or you choose to have none. It doesn't matter if you're Richard Dawkins or Fulton Sheen or Billy Graham. All right? It doesn't matter what your religion is. The reality is if people don't have children, there won't be any people left. And then we don't have to worry about the economy because the economy is the decisions that are made by millions of people every day who get out of bed and decide what they're going to do with their time, their talent, and their treasure. Wouldn't it be amazing if before they took the first step, they said a prayer and asked, God, what do you want me to do with my time, my talent, my treasure?
What a great thought. Thank you, Dave. And thank you, Rob and Alan. If you found today's program helpful, I have a suggestion. Why don't you pass it along to someone else who might benefit from listening as well? Thanks for doing that. And thanks for your support of the Public Square from the American Policy Roundtable. We'll see you next time.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.